Are you right wing or left wing? Um, my favorite wings are, um, honestly, I really like buffalo wings.
Hi, and welcome back to Gray Area Podcast. I'm your host, David Hollifield, and tonight I will be speaking with Professor Ratchford for episode number 2. We will be speaking about sexual assault allegations in politics. So before we get started, I'd like to mention that there's a number at the bottom of the screen which directly connects you to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. That network is available to you 24/7, and if you don't want to call, there is a chat feature on their webpage as well. On the political side of things, we will be speaking about four of the most prominent political figures in today's politics. Our current president, Donald Trump from the Republican Party, has had at least 22 sexual assault allegations against him, including his wife as the earliest one in 1989. Joe Biden, our current Democratic presidential nominee, has had 7 women from the Democratic Party come out and speak out against his inappropriate touching, which technically and legally is sexual assault, as well as one woman who was a staffer in 1993 come out and say that he in fact did sexually assault her. Justice Kavanaugh, who's a conservative judge recently selected for the Supreme Court, famously or infamously was accused of sexually assaulting one of his classmates in high school, and more recently, within the last 6 months, has been accused again from, I believe, another high school classmate. And lastly, Bill Clinton. Everybody knows about the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Technically consensual, but there's also the dilemma of a president taking advantage of an intern. There's a power imbalance there. And beyond the power imbalance between him and Monica Lewinsky, there's at least 3 other sexual assault allegations against him. And we'll also touch on the fact that Hillary Clinton slut shamed and denied those women as well. So I hope that you enjoy the type of content that we're putting out. And if you do, I ask that you please like, subscribe, and share this. And as always, cheers and enjoy.
So thank you for having me on, David. I really appreciate it. Now, when we are talking about sexual assault, sometimes one of the best statistical sources to actually go to really kind of get an idea of how much sexual assault is occurring in the United States is RAINN. Now, one of the big things that RAINN actually talks about is how roughly every 73 seconds, an individual in the United States is actually a victim of sexual assault. When we are talking about sexual assault, we are roughly going at about right now 400,000 sexual assaults a year. Our 2018 rates of sexual assaults have actually gone up. When we are talking in terms of sexual assault, basically the estimations are that 1 of every 6 women in the United States and 1 out of every 33 men in the United States have been the victim of attempted or completed sexual assault. So when we are talking about sexual assault, it is a pretty significant problem. I will say, benefit, I guess, or good side, our actual rates of sexual assault have been going down since 1993. So while we have seen a decline, it is actually still a pretty significant problem that we face.
Right. And that decline is consistent with overall violent crimes in general, which I don't think a lot of people know because the news makes you think that everything is chaos. But yeah, in general, violent crimes have been on a pretty dramatic decrease since 93.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not allowed to watch some TV shows anymore. But no, you're right. Crime has actually been showing a pretty consistent decline. We say consistent because what you will see are several times where we'll have like little blips where crime will go up for about a year and then go back down. So when we saw the housing market collapse, crime going up, and actually interestingly enough, in 2016 we saw a bit of a blip in crimes as well. Generally, what we do see is that when society kind of goes through periods of instability, that is when we will actually see higher rates of crime for a short period of time. But even despite these blips, we have been consistently going down in crime.
Right. I looked over some of the links that you sent me. So from the National Crime Victimization Survey from 2014 to 2018, you mentioned that sexual assault has actually risen in 2018. I looked at that and it was like more than double.
Mm-hmm. We did see a pretty significant rise. Why? I couldn't tell you. This is one of the things why we have to be a little bit careful about. I'm trying to. That's why I say students about data is tool in the toolbox. Know how to use that tool in the toolbox. Having it go up in 1 year doesn't actually tell us a lot. It doesn't actually tell if it's going to continue to go up or if it's going to go back down. Chances are a lot of what was going on in 2018 was there was a spill, so that could be reflective of their issue. What would be very interesting to see is in the next year or two when we get our 2019 statistics to see if it's gone down. It was just in that temporary blip.
Okay.
But yeah, it did go back up, which sucks.
Right. And then another thing I wanted to touch on real quick, just for reference, is as far as victimization goes, who is most likely to be a perpetrator of sexual assault or rape, and also what does it look like for somebody to come forward and actually report to the criminal justice system? I guess, like, what happens after somebody reports that might not incentivize them to report in the first place?
All right, so when we are talking about perpetrators, in the majority of sexual assault cases, what we do know is that the victim actually knows the perpetrator. There was this kind of traditional idea that if a female was a victim of sexual assault, it was a stranger rape, and that it was a stranger rape that was kind of perpetuated by an overwhelming use of force in which the female fought with like every bit of her kind of bad. What we're actually seeing now is one family member or an acquaintance. And not only that, overwhelmingly, what we also see is that idea of overwhelming force being used in a rape, the kind of ones that you see overly dramatized on TV and in the movies, is not what really happens either. More often than not, what we see in terms of sexual assault is that there are instances that involve dubious consent. So where consent was not given, or where consent was given and then retracted, or the person was in a kind of situation where they weren't capable of giving consent. And then we also see primarily coercion. Coercion does not necessarily always have to mean physical coercion. It can mean emotional blackmail. It can mean psychological blackmail. It's all about making somebody do something they don't want to do. Your average or your more common victim of rape, you're actually getting very few injuries on them because most do not fight. They kind of teach you to fight, but the truth of the matter is many of them don't. This can be problematic for a number of reasons. One, when you are a victim of sexual assault, one of the things you have to do if you are going to report it is you need to go to the police as soon as humanly possible so you can get a rape kit done. And that is so that you can preserve any biological evidence. One of the big things that we kind of deal with there, however, is a lot of females who are victims of rape actually recognize that they were victims of rape. They shame, might feel very badly about the encounter, and they might not have wanted to, but part of the issue that we see is kind of like heteronormative training in that, well, just because you didn't want to doesn't mean it was rape. So they're terms with that they've been a victim or recognizing they've been a victim. Is when a female, or because can be victims too, when there is a victim of sexual assault, it's not uncommon for them to want to go shower. It's not uncommon for them to actually want to take some time to come to terms with what's happened to them. Unfortunately, when they do that, that actually means that any physical evidence we might have is potentially now gone. What can be really problematic in terms of going to the justice system, and what's actually interesting is I taught victimology at one point in time. You were in that class, by the way, I believe.
Was.
Actually, yeah, it was. Going to the criminal justice system in terms of victimology has actually been called the second insult, or also secondary victimization. Mm-hmm. And this is for a kind of plethora of reasons. One is if you are going to go report a crime, things are actually a lot better now because police officers are more so being trained to interact with victims. But you still see officers, especially those who are asking questions, they've been trained to be suspicious. They have been trained to look for resistance. They have been trained to be critical and kind of pick apart what's being told to them. And when you have someone who is a victim, especially a victim of sexual assault, what we actually see is they're significantly more sensitive to what they perceive to be judgment. And it's also not uncommon for victims of sexual assault to wait before they go to police officers, only to be questioned, why did you wait? Why did you come straight to us? And that, even though that is considered to be from the officer's end a very viable question, for a victim, it can be incredibly kind of like almost harmful to their psyche. And if they do not necessarily have physical evidence because they have taken a shower, they have waited several days, and it wasn't one of those kind of stereotypical cases of overwhelming physical force that resulted in injuries, it's really going to come down to the victim's testimony versus the perpetrator's testimony.
Right.
So he said, she said.
Yeah. And then
this is one of our biggest problems with sexual assault reporting.
Right. One of the things that I looked at was, as far as the terminology is concerned, an unfounded or baseless sexual assault allegation or rape allegation can oftentimes be confused with a quote unquote false allegation, where if an allegation is actually false, then that means it's actually been investigated and proved to be false. Whereas unfounded or baseless could either be that it wasn't investigated or there just wasn't enough information, because it, most of the time it does end up being he said, she said. So that also affects the statistics behind it, which even with like skewed statistics and us not really having all the information available to us because so much of it goes unreported, it's still less than like 10% overall of allegations that are technically false, right?
Actually, some of the newer numbers say 5%.
Yeah, that was it said between 2 and 10, but most of the numbers that I actually looked at, I have screenshots of it, but they were between like 2 and 7 really, but I think that most of them were like 5.9.
Yeah, so the 2 to 10 statistic has been used for a while, and what you'll actually see in some of the sources that talk about false reporting is that in training, they've actually really commonly just stuck to the 2% rule, and they've taught that. What some of the more recent research has shown is that about 5%, give or take, of all formal sexual assault allegations are false. Mm-hmm. Now, this can actually be kind of problematic for several reasons. When we are talking about false allegations, one, I'm sure you're kind of aware of the kind of stereotype surrounding false allegations, that the majority of allegations are false allegations. But when we do see false allegations, we are talking out of every roughly 1,000 sexual assaults that happen. Some of the newer statistics were about 230 to 240 of those will actually go forward to police. And of that 230, 240, 5% of that are false allegations. So it is a small number and it is incredibly rare. What can make it problematic is it's actually a crime that is more likely to have a false allegation than some other crimes. So there have been other studies that have looked at false allegations of assault, of burglary, of murder, of theft, of robbery. And what they have found is that rape is actually one of the more consistently, or one of the more allegations that's more likely to be false, even though 5% is incredibly rare.
Right.
And I think that actually tends to kind of fuel that fire, or that idea that all of them are technically false.
Right. And then people always cling on to, specific stuff, whatever fits your agenda, you're going to cling to that and throw it out there. And also the news is the same way. Any kind of like sensationalized story, they're going to cling to it. So I think I remember seeing one time a woman had randomly said like 14 different men at different times had raped her, and they were like they all ended up being false or something like that. So people just share that, all over social media and are like, yeah, see, look, people, women are just out here accusing men of rape like nonstop, like, as if it happens all the time.
Well, that's one of the fun things. So I say fun things, but it's not really a fun thing. When you actually talk to a lot of people, so many of them either know somebody, or they know of somebody, or they heard a story of a friend who, there was a false rape allegation, and how life-destroying one can be if it's taken seriously and investigated. And that's actually true. A false allegation can be incredibly damaging. The problem is that we do tend to have a society that focuses very heavily on our personal beliefs and preferences and ideology. So oftentimes hearing about one story or two stories is enough to cement your belief, so that is what you look for. And what we actually see with human beings is that when you have a belief, you actually tend to unconsciously look for things that validate your belief, and you tend to actually unconsciously overlook things that go against your belief.
Yep.
So you're potentially going to miss evidence to the contrary, and then you're going to see evidence that supports your viewpoint, and then you go, ha ha, I knew it.
Yeah. What was that link that you sent me the other day?
Oh, the oatmeal. That was the oh gosh, I always forget what it's called, but it's such a beautiful thing, because it really does talk about how so there's two ways that we kind of instill our beliefs or further instill our beliefs. One is consciously, and one is unconsciously. That one deals with the conscious defense of our beliefs, because it's actually a psychological kind of effect or thing that we know about, where if you have a core belief that tends to be like one of your primary heavy beliefs, you have a lot of kind of faith in, that you put a lot of stock in, when someone actually contradicts it, questions it, or challenges it, your body actually goes into fighter mode, where your brain actually sends an emergency signal saying, oh my God, shut down, bad shit's happening. And so what you'll see is that people will either go very much into topic avoidance, or they'll get incredibly angry. And that is when, like, you have the raised voices, the screaming, the, well, what do you know? Blah, blah, blah. Let me tell you about what I've seen.
Triggered.
And triggering. It can be very problematic. And one of the things that I always remind my students to do when I'm actually talking to them about statistics and showing them stuff, like, what I always tell them is, guys, I'm not discounting your experiences. Your experiences kind of make up the core of who you are. However, you are one individual. There are 320 million people in the United States at any given time. You cannot assume that your singular experiences, your singular knowledge, which chances are, is potentially somewhat limited, because most of us, we don't leave our state that we live in, or we don't move too far out of our safe zone. So in the grand scheme of things, while your experience and your knowledge is important to you as an individual, it is a very, very tiny portion of our whole. And you can never assume that your tiny, tiny portion actually accounts for everything. It's not how it goes.
Right. So, and going off of that, like, I just kind of put it down in my notes as like knee-jerk reactions, which, I mean, essentially it's the same thing. It's like your fight or flight response, your knee-jerk reaction to whatever information that you're looking at. And as far as that's concerned, basically, like, there obviously are two main responses to it. When an allegation comes out and it's, let's just say it's somebody famous or it's a politician or something like that, there's going to be a group of people that automatically assume that the man is innocent, and then there's going to be the opposite of that, where it's automatically the woman is telling the truth, which the Me Too movement kind of encompasses that side of it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how, at least from my perspective, just looking at that compared to statistics, technically the Me Too movement is statistically like on the right side of the facts here. Like,
it is. The Me Too movement is actually a really interesting thing, because there has been some very recent research that I think was just released like March 20th by two individuals from, I believe it was Yale. And they actually talked about how the Me Too movement actually led to an increase in reporting that has so far had an 18-month increase in reporting.
Yeah.
And they've also attributed it to a higher number of investigations and arrests in terms of sexual assault complaints. When you actually look at the Me Too movement, there is it's basically called a social support theory of how, when you are a victim, or when you kind of undergo trauma, when you undergo stress, one of the main ways for you to recover is through the receipt of social support. Most individuals will go for face-to-face social support from family members and from peers, but we now find ourselves in a time period where we actually can reach people across the world, and where we can interact with people across the world. Now we have this access. It's actually not uncommon for people to basically find forums of other individuals with similar experiences, and to be able to share on that platform has been shown to be like really powerful, because one, getting support from your family is great, because your family is more so going to be emotional support. What we actually see with going online is you get a lot more informational support, but then you also almost kind of get a lot more backing, because you really do see how many other people say that happened to me too. And that can actually serve to strengthen somebody who has felt shame because of what's happened, or who has blamed themselves. There's a lot of self-blame in regards to sexual assault. So to have other people say something similar happened to me, it's not your fault, can actually really be an empowering thing for victims. And that's actually one of the reasons it's been hypothesized that the Me Too movement really did just take off the way that it did.
Yeah, I was thinking, obviously, like, this can't be, like, we can't say that this is a fact or anything yet because it's too early to know. But the fact that from 2014 to 2017, there was 1.3 out of every 1,000 people that were victimized. That more than doubled in 2018. The YouTube or Me Too movement started in 2017. So, I mean, there's a logical connection there that says, maybe the increase in reporting has something to do with the fact that there were more than 2 times the amount of reported victimization in 2018
Oh
compared
yeah.
to the 3 years prior to that.
Well, one of the big things that we have talked about in the past is that we really don't know how much rape happens. Our knowledge is really based off of estimations. I mean, we have the National Crime Victimization Survey, which really is one of our best estimators of it, because it is a data source that does seek to actually talk to victims and not only say, hey, were you a victim, but did you go to police? But even then, if you look at the sample size numbers for the National Crime Victimization Survey, which I can't remember off the top of my head, it still has room for error.
Mm.
So we still could be missing out. Now, what I will give the NCVS mad credit for is they actually did a massive rewrite in, I think it was like 1994, in order to account for what they consider to be gray area events. So types of crimes that maybe weren't considered traditional types of crime. And they also did a massive overhaul on their sexual assault measure, which when you compare it to the UCR, who only changed theirs in like the past 10 years or something, they really were actually measuring sexual assault more accurately earlier on. But even then, there's a lot of fear that we're potentially missing out on a lot. And it doesn't always account for the fact, kind of similar to domestic violence, oftentimes when we actually look at some of these numbers, that's a one-time thing. But you also do have victims who have been victimized multiple times, sometimes by the same perpetrator. And it also can potentially be missing out on those numbers as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that would not be an illogical conclusion to draw. I would say give it another year or two to really see how it pans out, and then we'll be able to have like a firmer conclusion. But it would not surprise me if the Me Too movement kind of served as an empowerment movement to make people more willing to go forward to report their sexual assaults, especially in light of things like the Cosby conviction and now the Weinstein conviction.
Yeah.
It might show people that, if someone who is that powerful can be convicted, someone who, is less powerful but victimized them has a similar chance.
Yeah. So just to go back to the knee-jerk reaction on the men's side of it, and this is just like these are my personal thoughts on it. So typically like the men's response, and it also depends on like who you're talking about too. If it's somebody that you highly respect, such as a politician or a celebrity, like, Bill Cosby has hardcore Bill Cosby fans.
Oh yeah.
That, I have no opinion on the Bill Cosby thing. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. But point being, everybody has their own personal biases towards which people they want to believe and who they don't want to believe. But in general, like, the people that are slut shaming and saying, oh, well, she made it up or whatever, probably 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a guy. And going back to the other, it's he's probably guilty, is mostly going to be females that are saying that. Now, obviously, like that, there can be men and women that think opposite of that. But anyways, the reason for me saying that is just to say, I mentioned that the statistics are on the side of the people that are saying she's probably telling the truth.
Yeah.
If only 5% of allegations are proven to be false, and that's out of a tiny people that even reported it and it actually got investigated in the first place, realistically, the chances are pretty slim that the victim is making it up. And considering how many women, like 6 out of 10?
Yeah, 6. No, hold on. Wow. 1 out of 6.
1 out of 6. Okay, yeah, right. So 1 out of 6 women are victimized. If women are tending to side more with the victims, that's probably, at the very least, an emotional response, considering the fact that 1 in 6 women are victimized. And it's a logical, there's logic behind it. There's statistics behind it. It makes sense. The knee-jerk reaction on the opposite side, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense. There's no type of emotional response that should make you automatically say, oh, well, she's a liar, or try to discredit her, try to make her look like she's promiscuous or something like that. Statistics don't back you up in that area. Literally, like, the only reason that you could automatically jump to that side is for some type of bias, either that you like that person that's being accused of it, or you're a man and it's a man being accused of it. I don't know. In my head, it's kind of like men don't want to be generalized, I guess, as bad people, as pigs, as rapists, whatever. So a lot of us, I guess, just don't want it to be true in the first.
Well, there's actually there's a lot of lines of thinking about that. So there are actually some victimology theories that talk about how not only just now, I don't know off the top of my head the stats regarding support for rape victims versus male and female, but there are some theories that actually show why people think the way they do in terms of victims and in terms of victim blaming. So in some instances, what we will see is that people believe in this idea of a just world, and how the world is truly just. Therefore, if something bad happens, it's happening to someone who must have done something to deserve it. And one of the reasons there's that viewpoint is because of the fact that you have this kind of unrelenting view of the world being a just place. And it's, again, one of those things where if your viewpoints are kind of like challenged, you shut down. So you're essentially kind of neutralizing or trying to explain away what happened. In other instances, what we sometimes see is when people are looking at victims of crime, what they will do is they will kind of try to put themselves in that victim's shoes and say, well, if that had happened to me, it wouldn't have happened because I would have done this. And that's supposed to kind of nullify people's fears of being a victim of crime. And while it's kind of a way of people to cope with the reality of crime, it unfortunately places a lot of the onus on the victim. One of the only times you will see almost like unrelenting support of a victim is if they are very, very young or very, very old, or if they are some way vulnerable. Like, the more vulnerable a victim appears to be, the more support you will see for them, because the less culpability we can assign to them for their own victimization. When it comes to sexual assault and blaming the victim of sexual assault, we have a really huge history behind this. We really absolutely do, because even if you look back to kind of like early law, when a female was married, she was property of her husband, and part of the marriage was actually considered to be a contract of sex, like whenever the man wanted it. We didn't really actually kind of observe marital rape as being a thing until more recently. And then what we also kind of, if you look back historically, women were kind of viewed as being individuals whose sexuality needed to be controlled because they could not control it themselves. Yeah, I'll let you like ruminate on that one. So this kind of idea of, women being out of control and, making false accusations or, somehow being at fault. It's not surprising. Some of the earliest studies about rape victims, gosh, I forget the guy's name. It was, I think, in the 60s. He did a study of rapes in Philadelphia. And what he found when it came to like kind of assessing culpability to rape victims is if the rape victim had a bad reputation. If the perpetrator actually knew that they had a bad reputation, they were less likely to actually think it was rape, or the victim was less likely to get support. This is actually one of the reasons why you saw rape shield laws being put into place, because one of the old school ways of kind of discrediting a victim was to say, well, she slept with other guys, so clearly she slept with this one, her own volition as well, and she's just mad.
Right.
It's actually part of kind of like a more systematic societal heteronormative creation that we've had for so long. And we're finally kind of getting somewhere with it, but it still really is one that is so ingrained. And it also can kind of be connected to other heteronormative expectations. Like one of the things that some individuals will talk about is when you're actually talking about males, is how they are taught to be strong, how they're taught to be unrelenting, how they're taught to not take no for an answer. And then you expect them in sexual relationships to magically learn how to take no for an answer. Which can also cause problems. Now, I'm not saying, don't raise your kids tough or something. It's all about teaching boundaries, obviously. Right. But that is some of the other stuff that we've kind of seen when we look at the gender literature. I've taught the gender and crime class too.
I don't know. I don't think I took that one.
You did not take that one. I didn't take it till, or I didn't teach it till after you left. But we talk about sexual assault in that class too.
Okay. Well, I guess we can jump into the meat and potatoes here of the actual politics, which this might be mostly me talking. But
it's okay.
Did you happen to look at any of the allegations against, let's say, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton?
Not, but I can.
Oh, you don't?
Kavanaugh, I know a little bit about. I'm
sure you've heard.
Oh yeah, I talked about it with my class because my class was very polarized about it when it was going on. The big thing I told them was to not automatically pick sides, but to see what the evidence actually indicated, and to not make jump assessments. It's not uncommon when you have like really kind of powerful or wealthy men to have someone suddenly come out of the woodwork apparently to accuse them. Sometimes it has to do with kind of like how represented they are in the public when a victim sees that her perpetrator is like going somewhere, or where they're going to be like put in a position of power where they're like, I can't let this happen, and that's when they like will move forward. And that's actually not uncommon. Just like when some of the original accusations against I'll use Cosby again. When Cosby came forward, then a whole bunch almost seemed to like follow and like stream. And it was because, again, similar to the whole social support with the Me Too movement, it kind of served as, oh my God, I'm not alone. And the next thing you saw was just like this dearth of reporting happening. But no, give me the deets on these, and I will give you my professional opinion.
So I looked up a little bit about Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, and Justice Kavanaugh. But like what you were saying, like I feel like a pretty good example of it would be Kavanaugh, what you were just talking about, as far as like if a woman chose, or a victim in general chose not to report, and then later on down the line, they saw that this person was going into some type of position of power or success or something like that, that might get them to come forward and put their story out there, I guess. So Christine Blasey Ford was the allegation against Justice Kavanaugh before he was brought into the Supreme Court, and that was her reason for coming forward. According to her, was that she saw somebody that, according to her, sexually assaulted her. I can't remember what year it was, but when they were in high school, so like 30. Probably around 30 years ago, 30 or so years ago, getting into the Supreme Court, she just couldn't rationalize that in her head. So she brought forward that claim. So that kind of like supports what you're saying about that. He actually has another allegation against him now, which is from another classmate. And the report that I saw was from September of last year. And apparently she provided 25 witness names to the FBI, and it never got investigated. So who knows what the reasons for that are. I mean, that could mean that the FBI found reasons not to investigate it, or, I mean, there's always the possibility of some type of corruption or whatever. But yeah, apparently there's a more recent allegation against him as well.
It also could have to do with statute of limitations.
Yeah. Well, yeah. They didn't investigate when he was going to Supreme Court?
I'm trying to look at when part of it's actually knowing when the statute of limitations are. So definitely going to put out, I am not a JD, Mr. Law School. So I don't know the statute of limitations, but it wouldn't be surprising if the statute of limitations, the statute passed, you can't really hold any charges. You could potentially kind of use that as not illegal, but maybe as behavior that's considered unbecoming to kind of cause second question. Why the second allegation might not have been investigated, there's so many potential reasons. We could say potential, corruption. It could also have to do with, I mean, she provided 25 names, but it was 25 names from 40 years ago. So they might have just hit up a few people who have no memory of it whatsoever. Or who even knows. That's a really tricky one, and to be honest, it's unfortunate that it wasn't potentially looked into more in depth. I mean, regardless of what the outcome was, one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is if someone does have strength to come forward, because so few do, it is important to at least investigate, not just for the victim, but for the person who's being accused as well, because unless it is actually investigated, then you always have that unknown. So then you're always going to have some people that are like, well, clearly that person's guilty. Or you're going to have the other supporters saying, well, if they had investigated it, they would have found him innocent. So not investigating definitely leaves far too much up to kind of our imaginations or our preferences.
Mm-hmm. So that's Kavanaugh, Bill Clinton. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail because, especially with Bill Clinton, I think most people have heard most of the stuff. He has at least four women that have four women that have, this is outside of Monica Lewinsky. And there was another one. He had two women that he like for sure sexually, or maybe not sexually assaulted, but had some kind of sexual misconduct with. And then he has four women that have accused him of actually sexually assaulting him. And another interesting point that I want to point out about that is Hillary Clinton's involvement in that. If we're going to believe the victims as far as the fact that they were assaulted and that the perpetrator might potentially be guilty, then we also should take into account the fact that Hillary Clinton, they said that Hillary Clinton intimidated them. There was, I think, at least two or three of the four victims, alleged victims of Bill Clinton, have come forward and said that they were called bimbos by Hillary Clinton. They were approached at different rallies and just like aggressively confronted about it. I think one woman said that Hillary Clinton grabbed her by her hand and said, "Thank you for everything that you're doing for Bill," and like squeezed on her hand because she hadn't reported and she wasn't coming forward with her story yet. And she said that she tried to turn away and like pull her hand away, and Hillary pulled her back towards her and kind of got in her face a little bit and was like, "I said thank you for what you're doing for Bill," something like that. So that's kind of crazy. Just something
that's horrifying. Regardless of political party, that's horrifying.
Exactly,
that anyone would potentially be treated that way. Which is why, again, I'm a big proponent. I don't care. I mean, I don't care what side of the politics you're on. If you've been accused.
I lost you there for a second.
Uh-oh, you did? Well, it's just, again, regardless of politics, regardless of party, investigation should happen. What's really unfortunate is how so many of these allegations have become just a political game of, well, you have the people that are supporters of Bill Clinton saying, well, yeah, but he was such a great president, or, well, yeah, maybe Hillary did intimidate, but, she'll make a great president, or, oh, someone's accusing Trump. Well, clearly it's because they don't like him being, because what we're basically saying is that our political preferences are more important than a potential victim of a sexual assault. I don't care what side of the carpet they're on. It does not matter. If there is an allegation, it should be treated with respect and it should be looked into.
Yeah. And that's pretty much like the whole point of why I asked you to do this with me is just to get like the facts, the statistics that we do know, and to talk about, we're talking about two people from the left and two people from the right. And I feel like there are two people that are pretty prominently respected from both sides. Justice Kavanaugh has great respect, even within the Supreme Court right now. Even Ruth Bader Ginsburg likes him. She's publicly said that she supports him as a justice, has supported him in the media and stuff like that. So he's a highly respected politician, or not politician, but a highly respected judge. Obviously, Donald Trump has a crazy following. And then you've got Bill Clinton, which he did great things for the economy, and people treat him like he's the best thing that happened to the Democratic Party sometimes. But he also, Monica Lewinsky, he's got these sexual allegations against him from 4 different women. He was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Trump was also best friends with Jeffrey Epstein for 20-something years.
So much awkwardness.
Right. The weirdest thing to me is that, but when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again, he was already convicted one time of, I think it was either human trafficking or it might have been underage, like sleeping with underage. I think it was human trafficking. Regardless, he was arrested a second time. They got the black book. They know all the people that are going to the island and everything like that. Well, once that all blew up on Facebook and social media in general, if you're on the left side, then you're sharing pictures of Donald Trump at parties with Epstein. And if you're on the right
side, it's Clinton.
Like, oh, look, it's George Soros and Bill Clinton hanging out with Epstein.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is Donald Trump and the Clintons they've been best friends for most of their adult life. And they both have been friends and run in the same circles with Jeffrey Epstein. So in my mind, again, my own personal opinion, they're both at the very least implicit in knowing what Jeffrey Epstein was doing all those years and not doing
implicit, or at least they should be investigated to see if they knew about it and failed to report, or if they engaged.
Right. To me, you can't even, it's not even like disputable that either one of them knew what he did. Donald Trump eventually separated himself. I think it was after, like, in the early 2000s, like maybe 2002, when Epstein was first, I think Epstein was actually being investigated for being with an underage girl at the Mar-a-Lago. And at that point, that's when Trump was like, all right, we're not going to be friends anymore. To me,
because that could have hurt his business.
Exactly, yeah. So some people will be like, oh yeah, well, that's when he found out that Epstein was a creep, and so he distanced himself. But we don't know that for a fact. The other possibility is that, now that it's come to light and everybody can actually see it, he just doesn't want that to be associated with his name and his business. So, but anyway.
Well, that could have led to a question about whether or not Epstein was using Trump's hotels for his stuff, which could have meant that Trump would have been potentially liable. Yeah. So separating was probably for the best in terms of his businesses. Now, whether or not it was for a moral purpose, I don't know, because I don't know Donald. But from a practical standpoint, it makes sense.
Right. And I don't know. It's just, it's crazy to me for either a Democrat or a Republican to look at that situation and try to act like you can point the finger at one and not point the finger at the other. It's just ridiculous.
Well, the way I see it and the way I think this is happening is just because we have become so polarized. And it actually showed from like the 30s, I think, onward about just how much bipartisan action we had. And we have consistently gone further and further apart in terms of bipartisanship. And we've actually become more and more polarized as a political system, to the point to where rather than it's kind of like working together for the greater good, it's us versus them. And, they are almost essentially the bad guy. And if you are someone who is, interested in working bipartisan, you're almost considered to be a bad guy because you're considered to be like giving into the enemy. Right. So this is one of those things with that whole belief system where now, since people are so divisive or in their beliefs regarding politics, that I can't admit that, my candidate, my person, whatever, did something bad because, well, then they're just like the person I hate. And that's when it's just like, completely gloss over, only share like, the pictures of Epstein and the Clintons, or only share pictures of Epstein and Trump and be like, oh, the other happened. No, it didn't happen. It would never have happened. It's again one of those ways of just rationalizing it in your head so that your core value systems, not like challenged.
Right. You basically just don't have any personal integrity at that point, in my opinion. But I feel like, that's also something that people can't help to a certain extent. Like you have
A
to be,
lot of it really is, a lot of it not isn't even like, blatantly choosing to ignore it. Sometimes it really is just that unconscious thing where you're just unconsciously rejecting it in your mind as being not possible, just because that is your thought process. And I mean, there are plenty of people that will, argue to the death that Trump didn't do anything wrong or Clinton didn't do anything wrong. And they might not necessarily be bad people. They might not necessarily not have ethics, but a lot of it just has to do with their mindset and really how they do almost automatically filter out information that goes against the people that they support.
yeah. And that's kind of like my goal with this podcast in general is just to like try to just try to show people their bias to
Yeah.
a certain extent, and maybe open up a few minds to take in different information that might conflict with what they traditionally believe.
I think
But yeah,
that's
to
important.
your point, there's like there was a girl that commented on a post the other day about Donald Trump and Trump versus Biden, which I'll get into their allegations in a second. But they're talking about Trump versus Biden and how the left hasn't really recognized the fact that Biden currently has a rape allegation against him. And she was just talking about, she was taking Trump's side, and she tried to say something about like Trump doesn't have, or the only allegations against Trump have been since he ran for president. Nobody ever made any allegations against him before he ran for president, which is not correct at all.
I was going to say, I don't think that's
No,
true.
it's not true. So I told her, how many he does have. And she said, oh, well, I don't care if he has 1,000 allegations against him before 2020 election. I'm still going to vote for him. So that just shows you, like, you're not actually being, like, true to yourself or true to anything, really. If you're literally just going to straight up say 1,000 people could accuse this person of rape, and I'm not going to believe him. Like, that's...
Well, politics has become the new religion where basically completely unquestioning devotion is expected. And if you straddle party lines, then there's something clearly wrong with you.
Yeah. So to get into Trump real quick, him and Bill Clinton both have Wikipedia pages specifically devoted to their sexual allegations alone. And then Biden has an article written about his. But yeah, Trump and Bill Clinton have pretty detailed Wikipedia pages that talk about their victims and have sources linked to them. So if anybody wants to check those out, Trump actually has at least 22 allegations against him, and they started in 1989 with his ex-wife. His wife actually accused him of raping her during their marriage in court, and she later retracted that, but I think that that retraction was part of like a settlement agreement, kind of similar to the fact that he raw dogged a stripper while his wife was pregnant and paid her hush money. That's, it's just an assumption, but it's, it kind of makes sense with his past.
Well, what we see about human behavior is relatively stable. This doesn't mean like that you're stagnant in your behavior, that you never change, but most people, when they engage in these types of behaviors, what we do see is a pattern. Mm-hmm. And more often than not, when you have someone that is really coming up against someone who is in power, honestly, I'm never going to be surprised when others come forward, because we're creatures of habit. Mm-hmm. And we really do show patterns of behavior. I mean, it's one of the things that we talk about in criminology is how we can actually begin to kind of predict your level of aggression, your level of potential deviance under the age of 10. Human behavior is really stable.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to touch on real quick in talking about that, because it was his ex-wife, a lot of people will be like, how do you rape your wife? And that kind of goes back to that whole antiquated belief that if you're married, then you just are supposed to have sex, like, no matter what. And that's obviously, like, if you're forcing yourself onto somebody and they do not want it, then you're sexually assaulting them. It's that simple. It doesn't matter if it's your wife.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah,
just
no,
wanted to
there are
throw that
still
out.
antiquated beliefs about the fact that once you're married, that is some type of contract for sex in perpetuity, regardless of what you want. And there have been numerous instances where, women have been raped by their husbands, and they have been kind of looked at as if it's just not something that could possibly happen. But it really is. And it's actually disturbing. I mean, the last time I actually looked at some of the spousal rape laws, there's actually spousal rape laws that are a little bit less than in terms of sexual assault severity than your typical sexual assault laws, almost like they're less punishable.
Right.
And like they have like different like kind of provisions and whatnot, because it still really is not considered to be something that is, you know, possible. Or you have that whole just world theory, or like that whole, well, if it was me it wouldn't happen because I would leave, blah blah blah. And it's like, it's probably part of like a greater sexual assaultive or domestic violence type behavior where leaving isn't necessarily an option.
Right.
But no, that is, oh yeah, if you ever want to get me hot and pissed off talking about spousal rape not being a thing,
Yeah.
we'll do it.
Um,
But that's just, yeah, antiquated
yeah, just a couple
BS
other things
ideas.
about Trump real quick where she said that there were none before 2016. So that was, his wife was back in 1989, and then there was another one in 1997. I think there was one in 94 that I missed. 97, there was a professional businesswoman. I think in the early 2000s there was one from what was the show? The Apprentice, one of the Apprentice
Mm-hmm.
contestants or whatever. And then also just the recorded tapes of him, the quote unquote locker room talk where he's talking about like, I just move on them, I just kiss them, I don't even wait. They let you do that when you're a star or something like that. So
Mm-hmm.
people want to defend that and say it's locker room talk, but I don't know what kind of locker room talk these guys are having, because I've never heard of or been okay with any guy saying that they use any type of power or authority, because that's what he's saying, is that his exact words were, when you're a star they let you do it. So
Yeah.
he's admitting that the only reason that he can get away with what he's doing is because he's in a position of power or celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the one where he said grab her by the pussy, but
Yeah.
also
Well.
there's a Howard Stern interview with him, and he talks about the Miss Teen USA and Miss
Yeah.
USA pageants, where he was the owner of the pageant, and he would walk into the dressing rooms whenever he felt like it because he knew he was allowed to. So he would walk in when he knew the women were changing and just start chatting
Mm-hmm.
them up. And there's actually at least one of the women that was in the pageant. I think there's actually one from the teen pageants that said that he would walk into their dressing room and there were girls as young as 15 in there. Um,
Ooh.
so, and that's something that he openly was bragging about. Not that
Yeah.
it was teenagers, but bragged on the Howard Stern show about how he was allowed to go into the pageant girls' room while they were changing because he's the owner and he
Mm-hmm.
can do whatever he wants. So, I mean,
Well, that's definitely a disturbing pattern of behavior. One of the things that I would say to keep in mind with the locker room talk thing that he was doing is, some of the people of power who you see them engage in kind of these patterns of behavior, what you have to keep in mind is they've always been in power.
mm-hmm,
And when you have always been in power, when you have always been in a higher position, it's probably not uncommon for you to be taught that you are allowed to do whatever you want and to get away with what you want because you do have that power. So chances are, he kind of views it as just being a thing because maybe that's how he was taught too. And I'm not ever going to excuse any type of exploitative behavior because that's just gross. But that could potentially be one of the reasons why he kind of acts the way he does, or he said some of the things that he said. Because if he's always been taught that, well, you're rich, you do whatever you want because, you're the star, you're the boss.
right.
For him, it might be just second nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all a product of our environment to a certain extent. So, I mean,
Oh
I
yeah, socialization is key, especially in childhood.
definitely, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I think that's it for him. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on Biden, um, which really interestingly to me the Me Too movement has really been pushed by the left. They did the Women's March against Trump and after he was elected and everything. And then, obviously they freaked out when Kavanaugh was about to be, put into the Supreme Court. But Joe Biden has a sexual allegation against him from 1993 from a staffer, and they've been completely silent, pretty much. Like AOC is the only one that I know of as of a few days ago that has even brought it up, and kudos to her because she gets a lot of crap.
Oh yeah.
She has said a lot of things that I think are really stupid, but at the same time, she's also called out a lot of corruption, and she doesn't care about stepping on toes within her own party, which I think is amazing. I think more people should do that. So she, she came out and basically said, if we're going to have any type of integrity and, try to act like we're the party of morality, then we should be looking at Joe Biden just as much as we look at anybody else, even if it hurts our, chances of beating Trump in the election, which I like, honestly, I can't say how much I respect that. Like, I don't, people get mad at me and like freak out because I'll say, I feel like you should give credit where it's due sometimes, and people just can't understand how I could say, oh yeah, well, so much respect to AOC when she said, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But
it's that polarizing aspect again.
Right. So I don't know. All of it is just insane to me. It doesn't make any sense in my mind how anybody can do any of the stuff that we've talked about as far as like supporting the Clintons, but also like not, talking about the fact that he has 4 allegations against him. Hillary slut shamed his victims. If you're a Trump supporter, saying that you'll allow 1,000 people to come out and claim rape allegations against him, and you're still not going to believe him. And then now this Biden, like, actually, one of the more important things that I found out about the Biden thing was that her name's Tara Reid, I think. It happened in '93. She was a staff assistant. When she tried to go to the media, she went to The Atlantic, was one of the sources that she tried to run the story to. They accused her of being a Russian agent.
A Russian agent?
Yeah, she had some type of a Russia, pro Putin comment on like Instagram or something like that. Where she just said like, I feel, something about like, I feel like Putin deserves like more respect than he gets or something like that. And she has friends from Russia, so she was just like talking about Russia in general. And anyways, they were like, oh, well, you're just a Russian agent. We're not going to, like, we don't take your story seriously, whatever. And then there was another, I think there were 2 sources that rejected the story. And then she brought it up to Time's Up Legal Fence to Fund, which is part of the, I think it was like women's victimization. So I can't remember the exact name, but I'll put the links in wherever I post the video at. She brought it to them, and they were the most successful GoFundMe, I believe, in the history of GoFundMe. They raised $24 million to go towards helping defend victims. So she brought the story to them, and at first, like, one of the directors was all about it, even though they knew that it was about Biden, whatever. They said, we really appreciate the fact that you came forward. We want to help you out, but we'll be in contact. Like, we have to talk about it with whoever. They came back and told her, sorry, we can't take it. Like, we can't touch this because something about tax laws, because they're a non-profit. So they said that it would violate their some kind of tax policy if they ran the story, because Biden is running for federal office. So like, technically they wouldn't be allowed to run a story on anybody in Congress, on Donald Trump, on any candidate for presidency, whatever. This legal defense fund would not be allowed to represent anybody against any of those potential candidates or representatives or whatever. That was their excuse. They talked to a tax law lawyer about it, and the tax law lawyer said that that's complete bullshit, basically. and
Mhm.
that as long as they came at it from a legal perspective only and didn't talk about any kind of political stuff,
Yeah.
then it pretty much didn't have anything to do with their taxes. I don't really know how that has anything to do with their nonprofit whatever, but the other part of that didn't get brought up by the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund was the fact that their PR firm's director is Joe Biden's top campaign advisor.
Oh, lovely.
So you could imagine how the PR firm of this legal defense fund, being Joe Biden's campaign advisor, might not want them to actually look into Joe Biden raping her.
Yeah, and one of the issues too that we're definitely going to see now too is just that going back to the whole like how polarized we are. You have so many people in the Democratic Party who are very much dead set against getting Trump out of House, and so they believe that like their official candidate is going to be the only one that can potentially do that. And since Joe Biden now has the nomination, whatever, they can't afford for him to fall in the public eye. So it's not surprising to see them ignore that, just like you have so many people on Trump's side ignoring it, because there is also a belief that, Trump needs to stay in for another 4 years because they believe he's done amazing things for the United States. And the only way to, make sure that that happens is to kind of brush aside those allegations. It is this idea essentially of politics over person,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very sad truth. No, in both cases, regardless, both deserve to be fully investigated.
Yeah, and that's so. You said pretty much exactly what my entire intention of this was. Is pretty much just to say, like, stop thinking according to your political party, like whoever you align with, because like realistically, what you should, well, you should look at everything objectively. You should only like try to take in facts and think objectively. But if you're going to look at it from a political perspective and you want to have an
Yeah.
opinion politically about it, I think that you should look at that situation and say, let's say I'm a Trump supporter and Trump is accused of rape. I need to look at that like, if Joe Biden was in the same exact circumstances, how would I react to that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's the only way for you to really be objective about it. If you're just like, oh, well,
Yeah.
this is Donald Trump, so he's automatically innocent, like you're an idiot. Like you're being an idiot. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It requires a degree of self-reflection in order to be able to look at a situation and say, okay, what do my emotions say about this versus what do the facts say about this? It's looking at it from a logical standpoint and emotional standpoint, and you can look at it with both. You don't have to get rid of your emotions or your beliefs. Part of it is just being able to kind of take it down and say, why do I feel this way? And is my feeling towards this based off of my emotions? Is it based off of my hatred for a certain individual or my devotion to this? Or is the way I'm feeling, is it informed by facts? Is it informed by objectivity? And that's one of the big things when I'm teaching, as I try to tell my students, is I tell them I have political beliefs. I never tell them what my political beliefs are, because that should never matter when I'm teaching. But it's always, you should be able to look at both sides completely objectively and say, okay, this person did it on this side, this person potentially did it on this side. What do we do with both of them? We try to hold both accountable if there is enough evidence to support it.
Yeah.
It's not the popular opinion, of course, or the popular viewpoint, but you also have to keep in mind that we are in a society where ideology and personal preference has really kind of become more important to people and their identity and their behaviors than facts, than science, than anything like that. I mean, I've had people tell me, well, scientists lie. I'm like, I'm a scientist, right? And they're like, no, you're not. I'm like, technically I'm a behavioral scientist.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not lying. here's all the stuff I'm using. And it's just this idea that if someone says something that goes against your belief, it's because they're wrong or they're lying. And that, oh, well, I don't like that, so I can ignore that fact for my preferences. That really has become something like that in the past few years, we've become even more doggedly devoted to, it seems. We went through a period of time where we were becoming more focused on science and empirical information to inform our choices and inform our policies and our programs, and we seem to be kind of backsliding a little bit. And I think part of it does have to do with just how divisive we've become and how polarized everything's become. We really have kind of turned more so towards emotions than anything else anymore.
Yeah, and it's not any secret to the politicians either that like they know that they can get away with it. And I can give you, well, Trump when he was still campaigning said a direct. This is a direct quote.
They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
That was after he like had already said a lot of bad things about immigrants, a lot of bad things about Muslims, whatever. I think the recording had already come out about grab her by the pussy, everything, and he knew it. Like, and it's a fact. I mean, he came out and said, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and I wouldn't lose a single vote. Like he's insulting your intelligence if you're a Donald Trump supporter by saying that. And then Joe Biden at the same time. He had 7 different women that were all actually 8 technically, because the rape allegation was also a staff worker that worked directly for him, so she's also a Democrat. But he had 7 different females over the last, I think, year or so come out and speak out against the way that he touches and sniffs and
Oh, I've seen some of those pictures.
Yeah, all those creepy Joe pictures and videos and stuff like that. He's had 7 women come out and publicly say, Joe Biden did this to me. It made me feel this way. He needs to stop it. He needs to apologize, whatever. And Joe Biden gaslighted them and was just like, I've never done anything wrong ever in my political career. And these women are all like,
yeah,
they don't understand. I'm just a grandfather figure. He tries to play it off like it's bullshit.
Yeah.
So they know.
Well, that's not surprising to an extent either. I mean, we have enough trouble with rape allegations, but rape and sexual assault includes more than just penetration. It includes, verbal and physical sexual harassment, unwanted touching. And a lot of people don't understand that is actually a form of assault. Many actually kind of consider it to be like a non-threatening, non-problematic behavior. But if you're a female or male, by the way, because Terry Crews talked about how he was inappropriately touched as well.
Who the hell would inappropriately touch
what was that?
somebody? I would be.
Oh,
terrified.
Yeah, he said it was like at a party, someone inappropriately did something to him because he was speaking in support of the Me Too movement.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing.
Yeah, it was actually kind of it was a great thing.
That dude is massive. I would never want to do anything to piss him off.
It just shows you how we have not taught people about boundaries. I mean, there's nothing wrong with hugging someone that you know and that you care about and that is consenting to it. But we really don't have many boundaries in terms of physical touch anymore. And that is why so many people will touch other individuals so casually and not realize, like, hey, that wasn't something you were given permission to do, and how that might make somebody feel. Now, of course, some people would say, well, you're being overly sensitive. It's unwanted touching.
Yeah.
Our reality.
Yeah.
But I really do think that regardless of political party, allegations should always be taken seriously. And I do understand that there's frustration. There's actually some research that has shown, even though so few rape allegations are false, that it actually can cause a lot of frustration with the detectives who are in charge of investigating rape allegations. It can actually make them more suspicious, so that they're actually more likely to not believe a true rape victim when they come forward. And that's problematic as well. Like, it's just, there are so many levels to this problem. Mm-hmm. There really, really are. And they just kind of compound each other so significantly. While there is a fear of, these false accusations, I really do think that our focus should always be on understanding and respecting the potential victim, and at least seeing if there is any truth to the allegations. And that is just so that either if that person is held is guilty, they can be held accountable. And so if there is none, then the person who's been accused has their name cleared.
Yeah. I don't know. There's like part of me that kind of thinks, and a lot of people might disagree with me about this, but I almost feel like if it's, I mean, there's no way to really keep those stories out of the media, I guess, but I almost feel like they shouldn't be broadcasted to the world unless they're actually investigated.
That can be a tricky one too.
Yeah.
It's
Because
you'll be viewed as trying to suppress victims.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's,
there's a no win for that one, unfortunately.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because like,
I think taking some time to look into the allegations rather than just blindly reporting on them is a good idea, because you don't want to be like, what was the Rolling Stone author that wrote an entire article about that person who had been raped by the frat, but then it turned out like it was completely false, and it was like a huge article in Rolling Stone.
yeah.
And it was because I don't think there was much research done. I think if you are a media outlet and you do get information, that you should at least try to kind of verify some of the basic facts to see if there is at least some potential truth to it, and then potentially move forward.
Yep. Yeah, it's such a touchy subject. Like, you know,
It's one of those subjects, and I love telling this to my students, because whenever I criticize the justice system, I hate it apparently, or whenever I say the justice system is good, I'm supportive of corruption, and I can't win. But it's one of those ones where there's really no good answer.
right.
And there's no clear-cut answer because it is such a complicated issue.
Yeah, it's really difficult because in my mind, it's very important to, like, due process is a very important right that we have.
Oh, we have to maintain that. We cannot start to overlook due process, because that becomes a slippery slope argument.
Exactly. And
But we also have
not
to
only that, but
respect
like,
victims.
yeah, so yeah, it's really difficult. Innocent until proven guilty, but at the same time, the majority of statistics weigh in favor of the victims. So I don't know. I feel like honestly, it's just best to just reserve your opinion until you have all the facts. And even then, it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and
when it comes to sexual assault and stuff like that, it's really hard to hard to have any kind of opinion. Because
it is, and it's also hard because people really do see this as like this, or like the victim versus the offender, like you have to pick a side. Yes, for the victim, emotionally they potentially need help, but you can actually respect a victim and respect their needs while also respecting the rights of the accused. And it really is finding that balance, and that balance is what is so hard to find.
That's a novel idea.
It's a very novel idea, and it's one that we should be focusing on more, which is why you do see kind of like more and more like victim compensation funds, victim services. I mean, even here in Lawrenceville, we actually have Mosaic, which is the Rape Crisis Center. You can go there without ever having to press charges, and you can get a rape test kit done. You can get counseling. You can get a whole bunch of services, regardless of whether or not you even move forward with an allegation. And they'll actually hold on to your assault kit for a certain period of time. So if you change your mind to go forward, they'll have it for you.
Do you have to be a resident of Lawrenceville for that?
I don't think you do. Not for that kind of thing. But even just having like a program like that, where even if they don't go forward, they respect your choice and they will counsel you. And, if things don't go forward the way that you want them to, you still have support.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I actually didn't even know anything about that. So
I heavily recommend checking out Mosaic. They actually do a really great job.
Yeah, I think I'm going to check that out, and I'll link that with the video as well.
Yeah. There's another one too. I forget its name, but it actually is a victim focused service center that focuses primarily on Middle Eastern and Asian victims. So that if you have someone from a Middle Eastern or Asian country who is here, who is victimized, they'll be able to go to the center so they can find someone that actually potentially speaks the language to kind of help with the process, but also someone who knows the culture.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we actually had at the school one day was a seminar about some of the very significant cultural implications with sexual assault, and how certain cultures respond very differently. And a traditional rape crisis center might not be actually ideal for victims of certain cultures. So actually having like a culture-centered crisis center could be incredibly beneficial. And that one actually is really amazing. And
Yeah.
I feel bad because I've completely forgotten the name.
Yeah. That's interesting. That might be one of my next podcasts, actually. I've got a few Muslim friends that I've reached out to about either talking about like the Israel-Palestine conflict, or one of them actually mentioned something about how Palestinians aren't even allowed to get tested for COVID.
Oh, wow.
Something cultural about it. So it's interesting that you bring that up about like the rape testing and just that entire thing. It's something that people don't really think about.
No, they really don't. And it was actually really eye-opening for someone like me who has taught about sexual assault for so many, like, for not so many years. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough. Just be like, oh man, I never even contemplated that. Like, that's just even like the words you use, how you approach it, could actually be incredibly problematic.
Yeah. There was a nice video. I think it might have been Gwinnett County Police, actually, that I think it was an automobile accident, and they were the female that was in the accident was Muslim, and she was wearing a hijab, and he was just like, I mean, this shouldn't be like a sensational story. It should just be like natural, but he was very respectful in, respecting her traditional hijab, and like whether or not he was allowed to touch her, and like, can he see her head to evaluate her for like, cuts,
Yeah.
and abrasions and stuff like that. So
That's good.
it's good.
Well, that's not surprising.
It's good when you see a positive story every now and then. So I'm proud. Gwinnett County PD makes me proud every now and then.
They've done some good stuff. And if you look at I think it's the 21st Century in Policing report, one of the big things that they do talk about is actually learning cultural differences, so that when you do have to interact with either victims or potential offenders of different cultures, that you can do so appropriately so as not to escalate a situation or so as not to cause potential problems.
Yep. Oh yeah. What are you drinking?
Tullamore cider cask scotch.
Okay. Cool. This is Pierre Ferrand 1840 cognac.
Ooh, well, somebody's fancy.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess I'll get off of here, but I really appreciate you doing this for me.
Yeah, no problem, hon. Let me know if you need anything, okay?
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, cheers, man.
Cheers.